57 years. That's how long it's been since the United States Navy lost a nuclear submarine. 57 years. Hundreds of submarines, thousands of patrols, tens of thousands of dives to depths that would crush a human body in milliseconds. In those 57 years, American submarines have collided with underwater mountains at full speed. They've struck unknown objects in hostile waters. They've operated in the most dangerous environments on Earth, beneath the Arctic ice, in shallow coastal waters, in the depths of the Pacific and Atlantic, and not one has been lost, not a single SUBSAFE-certified submarine, not a single crew. This perfect safety record didn't happen by accident. It happened because of a decision the Navy made in 1968, a decision forced upon them by the loss of 99 men in a submarine that should never have gone to sea. The USS Scorpion was the last nuclear submarine the United States Navy ever lost. And the reason she was the last is more important than the reason she sank. To understand why the Scorpion was the last, you need to understand what came before her. On April 10, 1963, 5 years before the Scorpion was lost, the nuclear submarine USS Thresher imploded during deep diving tests off the coast of Massachusetts. 129 people died. The cause was identified. A silver-brazed pipe joint in the seawater system failed, flooding the engine room, shorting out electrical systems, and triggering an automatic reactor shut down. When the crew attempted an emergency blow to surface the submarine, the system failed. Moisture in the high-pressure air froze and clogged the valves. The submarine sank uncontrollably beyond her crush depth and imploded. The Navy's response was swift and comprehensive. 54 days after the Thresher sank, the Navy established the SUBSAFE program, the most rigorous quality assurance and safety certification system ever implemented in any branch of the military. SUBSAFE required full inspections of every weld, every pipe, every valve. It required complete material traceability, from the mining of the steel to the installation of every bolt. It required the replacement of all silver brazed joints with welds. It required decentralized emergency blow systems, backup power sources, and enhanced flooding control measures, and it required time. A full SUBSAFE overhaul could take 3 years. It was expensive, it was labor-intensive. And in 1966, at the height of the Cold War, some in the Navy began to question whether they could afford it. The Soviet Union was building submarines faster than the United States could maintain them. American submarines were spending years in dry dock undergoing SUBSAFE upgrades while Soviet submarines prowled the Atlantic and Pacific. The pressure to maintain operational readiness was immense. And so, in 1966, the Chief of Naval Operations approved a compromise, the Reduced Availability Overhaul Program. It was an abbreviated maintenance concept. Emergency repairs only, minimal safety upgrades. The goal was to keep submarines at sea, operational and available for Cold War missions, at a fraction of the cost and time of a full SUBSAFE certification. The first submarine selected for this program was the USS Scorpion. It was the cheapest submarine overhaul in United States Navy history, and it was a fatal mistake. The USS Scorpion was a skipjack-class nuclear attack submarine, fast, agile, and deadly, 252 feet long, powered by a nuclear reactor, capable of speeds exceeding 29 knots underwater. She was commissioned in 1960 and served the Navy well for 8 years. Mediterranean deployments, NATO exercises, Cold War patrols. She participated in operations during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But by 1967, the Scorpion needed maintenance. She had known mechanical problems, seawater piping defects, similar to the issues that had destroyed the Thresher, an unreliable emergency ballast blow system, an aging 8-year-old main storage battery. In 1966, she had exceeded her test depth during an operation and sustained damage. The Navy knew about these problems. And in February 1967, the Scorpion entered Norfolk Naval Shipyard for what should have been a comprehensive overhaul. Instead, she received the reduced availability treatment. Critical SUBSAFE upgrades were deferred. Emergency seawater shut-off valves were not installed. The central valve control system was not modernized. The decentralized emergency blow system was not properly implemented. The main storage battery was not replaced. Full hull inspections were not completed. The Navy's plan was to complete full SUBSAFE certification in 1974, 6 years later. By the time the overhaul was finished, the crew had given the submarine a nickname, USS Scrap-Iron. It was dark humor, but it reflected their concerns. In October 1967, Lieutenant Commander Francis Atwood Slattery assumed command of the Scorpion. He was 36 years old, a Naval Academy graduate, highly trained and experienced. He had served aboard the USS Nautilus and completed advanced nuclear propulsion training. By every standard, he was qualified to command a nuclear submarine, but no amount of training or experience could compensate for the maintenance shortcuts the Scorpion had received. On February 15, 1968, the USS Scorpion departed Norfolk for a 3-month deployment to the Mediterranean. 99 crew members were aboard. None of them would return. On May 21, 1968, at midnight GMT, the USS Scorpion transmitted her final radio message. She reported her position as approximately 50 miles south of the Azores Islands. She was en route to Norfolk, Virginia. Estimated arrival, May 27, Memorial Day, at 5 p.m. The message was routine, standard procedure. After that, silence. At 6:20 p.m. and 44 seconds on May 22, 22 hours after her last communication, something went catastrophically wrong. 3 separate underwater listening stations, part of the Navy's secret SOSUS surveillance network, detected an explosion deep in the Atlantic Ocean. The sound was faint, muffled, but unmistakable, an internal explosion inside a submarine. For 22 minutes, the SOSUS hydrophones recorded nothing. Then, at 6:42 p.m. and 34 seconds, they detected a second event. This one was massive. The energy signature was equivalent to the detonation of 13,200 pounds of TNT. The sound was detected by listening stations over 1,000 miles away. It was the acoustic signature of a pressure hull implosion. The USS Scorpion had imploded at a depth of 1,530 feet. In 37 milliseconds, less than 0.04 of a second, the submarine was crushed. Every crew member still alive was killed instantly. The wreckage continued to descend, collapsing further as it fell. The 6 torpedo tubes, more pressure-resistant than the main hull, imploded sequentially at greater depths, creating additional acoustic events. Finally, the wreckage settled on the ocean floor, 10,000 feet below the surface, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. In total darkness, in freezing water, in silence. The USS Scorpion was gone. On May 27th, families gathered at Pier 22 in Norfolk, waiting in the rain. The Scorpion never arrived. On June 5th, the Navy declared the submarine and her 99 crew members presumed lost. 5 months later, using acoustic triangulation from the SOSUS recordings, the wreckage was found, exactly where the sound analysis predicted, accurate to within 0.08 nautical miles. Photographs taken by the Bathyscaphe Trieste in 1969 showed the submarine broken into 2 major pieces. The pressure hull was completely destroyed. Scattered throughout the debris field were fragments of the main storage battery. A section of the battery cover was recovered. It showed violent deformation from an internal explosion. Embedded in the material were high-velocity fragments of alumina, the same material used in flash arresters inside battery cells. The evidence pointed to a hydrogen explosion in the aging, unreplaced battery as the initial event. The explosion killed the forward crew instantly, damaged electrical systems, likely triggered a reactor scram, and left the remaining crew with no power and no functioning emergency blow system. For 22 minutes, they fought to save their ship, but the Scorpion had not been upgraded. The systems they needed to survive had been deferred, and so they sank. The Navy's official conclusion, published in January 1969, was blunt. The certain cause of the loss of Scorpion cannot be ascertained from any evidence now available, but the cause of the loss was less important than what the Navy did next. The loss of the USS Scorpion forced the United States Navy to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Reduced Availability Program, the maintenance shortcut designed to keep submarines operational during the Cold War, had failed. The Scorpion was not SUBSAFE-certified. She had been scheduled for full certification in 1974. She never made it, and 99 men were dead. Within weeks of the Scorpion's loss, the Navy made a decision that would define submarine safety for the next half-century. They abandoned the Reduced Availability Program entirely. No more shortcuts, no more deferred upgrades, no more compromises. Every submarine in the fleet was placed on an accelerated schedule for full SUBSAFE certification. No exceptions. The message was clear: operational readiness was important, but safety was non-negotiable. For years, the Navy denied that the Reduced Availability Program had even existed. In 1995, when asked about the program, the Naval Sea Systems Command stated they had no record of it. But on March 25, 1999, the truth came out. The Congressional Record, the official documentation of Senate proceedings, published a discussion of the Scorpion loss. And in that record, the existence of the Reduced Availability Program was confirmed. The Scorpion had been the test case for a maintenance concept the Navy later tried to erase from history. But the lesson could not be erased. Since the Scorpion's loss in 1968, the United States Navy has built or retrofitted every single submarine in its fleet to full SUBSAFE standards. And in 57 years, not one SUBSAFE-certified submarine has been lost. Not one. The effectiveness of SUBSAFE is not theoretical. It has been tested, and it has been proven. On January 8, 2005, the nuclear attack submarine USS San Francisco was traveling at full speed, over 30 knots, 525 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Without warning, she struck an uncharted underwater mountain. The impact was catastrophic. The sonar dome, the bulbous structure at the bow of the submarine, was completely destroyed. The forward ballast tanks were ruptured. The hull was buckled, metal was torn and twisted. One sailor, machinist mate second class Joseph Ashley Allen, was killed instantly by the force of the impact. By every measure, the collision should have been fatal to the entire crew, but the pressure hull held. The SUBSAFE-certified design, strengthened welds, rigorous inspections, redundant systems, allowed the submarine to survive an impact that would have destroyed any pre-SUBSAFE vessel. The USS San Francisco surfaced under her own power. She traveled over 300 miles to Guam for emergency repairs. The crew survived. In 2021, the nuclear attack submarine USS Connecticut struck an unknown underwater object in the South China Sea. 11 sailors were injured. The submarine was damaged, but she survived. She returned to port. These submarines survived because of SUBSAFE, because of the lessons learned from the USS Thresher in 1963 and the USS Scorpion in 1968. Before SUBSAFE, the United States Navy lost submarines at an average rate of 1 every 3 years. Since SUBSAFE was fully implemented in 1968, the loss rate for certified submarines is 0. 57 years, 0 losses. The USS Scorpion was the last because the Navy learned the lesson and never forgot it. 99 men died aboard the USS Scorpion. Commander Francis Slattery, Chief Walter Bishop, Electrician Vernon Foley, whose wife Barbara waited at the pier with their infant daughter, radioman Michael Bailey, whose stepmother had already lost her first husband on the USS Thresher 5 years earlier, technician Richard Schaefer from Arkansas, and 94 others. Each had a family, each had a story. Every year since 1968, their families gather at Pier 22 in Norfolk to remember. Names are read. A wreath is laid on the water. The tradition has continued for 57 years. At the Naval Station Norfolk Memorial, The names of all 99 crew members are inscribed in stone. The inscription reads, "On eternal patrol, the crew of the USS Scorpion remains 10,000 feet below the Atlantic Ocean. The wreckage is protected as a war grave. No recovery or disturbance is permitted. They did not die in vain, because their loss forced the Navy to finish what the Thresher had started, the complete transformation of submarine safety. And that transformation has saved thousands of lives. Here is the legacy of the USS Scorpion. Before SUBSAFE, between 1915 and 1963, the United States Navy lost 16 submarines to non-combat causes. An average of one every 3 years. The USS Thresher, lost in 1963, created the SUBSAFE program. The USS Scorpion, lost in 1968, proved why SUBSAFE was necessary. Since 1968, since the Navy committed fully and irrevocably to SUBSAFE, 0 certified submarines have been lost. 0. Every modern American submarine is built to SUBSAFE standards. Every weld is ultrasonically inspected. Every material is traceable from the mine to the installation. Every emergency system is tested at operating depth. Every component meets rigorous specifications. Submarine crews receive annual training on SUBSAFE principles. They study the Thresher. They study the Scorpion. They learn what went wrong and why it will never happen again. The safety culture that emerged from those two tragedies is now so deeply embedded in the submarine force that it is instinctive. SUBSAFE is not a program, it is a way of life, and the results speak for themselves. The Virginia-class submarines, the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, the Columbia-class submarines under construction. Every single one carries the legacy of the 99 men who died on the Scorpion. Because their deaths taught the Navy a lesson that has never been forgotten, there are no shortcuts to safety. The USS Scorpion rests 400 miles southwest of the Azores Islands, 10,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. She has been there for 57 years. We do not know, with absolute certainty, what caused the initial explosion. The most likely explanation, based on acoustic evidence, physical debris analysis, and expert testimony, is a hydrogen explosion in the main storage battery, followed by electrical system failures, a reactor shut down, and the failure of emergency systems that had not been upgraded. But the precise technical cause matters less than the institutional cause. The Scorpion sank because the Navy prioritized operational readiness over safety, because Cold War pressures led to shortcuts, because critical upgrades were deferred, and when 99 men died as a result, the Navy stopped. They acknowledged the mistake, they reversed course, and they committed, completely and permanently, to never making that mistake again. That decision has protected every submariner who has gone to sea in the 57 years since. The USS Scorpion was the second nuclear submarine the United States Navy lost. She was the last because the Navy chose to learn. The 99 men aboard the Scorpion are on eternal patrol. They will never come home. But their sacrifice created the safest submarine force in history. And as long as the lessons of their loss are never forgotten, the Scorpion will remain the last.